Silas had lived alone on his ranch for as long as he could remember. The land stretched out before him, a vast emptiness that matched the quiet loneliness that filled his heart. The only company he had were his cattle, the occasional traveler who passed by, and the endless wind that swept across the plains. He was a man used to solitude, finding comfort in the work of his hands and the stillness of his surroundings. Yet despite his contentment with the life he had built, there was always something missing, a piece of him that longed for something more. One morning, as Silas stepped out onto the porch to greet the new day, something caught his attention in the distance. It was faint at first, just a shadow against the rising sun, but as the figure drew closer, Silas realized it was a rider. He couldn't make out much, just the silhouette of a person moving toward him, their horse's hooves kicking up the dust as it trotted across the plains. Silas was no stranger to travelers, but this one seemed different. There was something in the way the rider moved, something that drew Silas's gaze. As the figure got closer, he could see that it was a woman unlike any he had ever seen. She wore a long, flowing red blanket over her shoulders, and her hair was dark and long, rippling in the wind. Her face, though partially obscured by the blanket, looked determined, as though she had a purpose in mind. Curiosity piqued. Silas took a step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. He had lived on this land for years, but he'd never encountered anyone from this part of the world. He wondered who she was and why she was here. The woman rode her horse up to the ranch, dismounting with a graceful ease that surprised Silas. She was tall, her movements sure and confident as she tied her horse to a nearby post. For a moment they simply stared at each other. Silas stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do or say. The woman, however, seemed unfazed by the silence. She looked at him with steady eyes, and Silas couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward her, a connection he didn't understand. "I'm Taylor," the woman finally spoke, her voice steady but with an edge to it, as though she had made up her mind about something. "I've traveled far to find you, rancher." Silas blinked, taken aback by her directness. "Find me?" he asked, his voice a little rough from surprise. He had no idea who she was or why she would come to his remote corner of the world. Tala nodded. "I've heard of you," she explained. "Stories of your kindness, your strength. I need shelter. I've traveled a long way and the night is too cold to continue." Silas hesitated for a moment, uncertain of what he should do. His ranch had been a place of solitude, a sanctuary from the outside world. He wasn't used to having strangers, especially women, show up at his doorstep. But there was something in her eyes, something that made him trust her, though he couldn't quite explain why. "Come inside," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Tala gave a small, appreciative nod as she walked past him, her presence filling the room in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. The inside of Silas's home was simple, nothing more than a small living area with a few chairs, a wood stove, and a table where he ate his meals. The walls were bare, save for a few old pictures of his family and the land. It wasn't much, but it was home. Tala sat down on one of the chairs near the stove, taking off her blanket and revealing the dark, weathered clothes underneath. She had a quiet strength about her, an aura that made Silas feel both intrigued and somewhat nervous. He wasn't used to being around women, especially women like Tala, whose presence seemed to fill the room with an energy he couldn't ignore. "I'm sorry for intruding," she said softly, her voice more vulnerable now, "but the night was cold and I had nowhere else to go." Silas nodded, not sure how to respond. He wasn't used to strangers, let alone a woman who seemed so confident in her own skin. "It's no trouble," he said after a moment, his voice gruff. "You're welcome to stay the night." Tala gave him a small smile, one that seemed to hold more meaning than words could express. "Thank you." As the evening wore on, they ate in silence, the flickering firelight casting long shadows on the walls. Silas found himself stealing glances at her from across the table. There was something about her, something that made him feel both at ease and on edge. He had no idea who she was or where she came from, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was different from anyone he had ever met. The silence between them was comfortable, but it was also charged with an unspoken tension. Silas didn't know how to act around her. He was used to solitude, to the quiet life of a rancher, where emotions were few and far between. But Tala's presence had awakened something in him, something he hadn't realized he had been missing for all these years. After dinner, Tala helped Silas with the dishes, her movements fluid and efficient. It was clear that she was no stranger to hard work, and Silas couldn't help but admire her strength. She wasn't like the women he had known in town, fragile, delicate. She was different. She had a fire in her that seemed to burn just beneath the surface. As the night drew to a close, Silas led Tala to a small room in the back of the house. It was modest, with a simple bed and a small window that looked out over the land. "You can sleep here," Silas said, his voice quieter now. "It's not much, but it's warm." Tala nodded, giving him a look that seemed to say more than words could. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft yet filled with a quiet strength. Silas lingered in the doorway for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He had never been one to share his space with others, let alone a stranger. But there was something about Tala, something in the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, that made him feel like he had known her for much longer than a few hours. As he closed the door behind him and made his way to his own room, Silas couldn't help but think about the woman who had just entered his life. There was a connection between them, something that neither of them could deny. But what that connection meant, Silas wasn't sure. All he knew was that he was no longer alone, and for the first time in a long while, that thought didn't seem so bad. The next few days passed quickly, but Silas found himself unable to shake the presence of Tala. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. There was a quiet confidence about her, an unspoken strength that made Silas feel both comforted and unsettled at the same time. She was a mystery, and that mystery pulled at him in a way he couldn't explain. Tala proved to be a hard worker, fitting right into the daily rhythms of life on the ranch. She helped Silas with the animals, the chores, and even the cooking. She wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, and Silas found himself watching her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Her movements were fluid, graceful even, as if she had spent her entire life in the wilderness, surviving on her own. She wasn't just a guest in his home. She was someone who belonged here, someone who understood the land in a way that few others did. Each morning, they would work together side by side, the sun rising behind them, casting long shadows over the land. Silas had never been much of a talker, but there was something about Tala that made him open up. They would exchange quiet words here and there, mostly about the work that needed to be done, but sometimes, in the stillness of the day, their conversations would drift to other things. Tala would share stories of her tribe, of her ancestors, of the traditions that had been passed down through generations. Silas listened intently, captivated by her words, by the way she spoke with such reverence for her people. But despite their growing closeness, a wall still stood between them, an invisible barrier that neither of them could cross. Silas was a man of the earth, a rancher bound by the laws of the land, and Tala was an Apache woman, bound by the traditions of her people. Their worlds were different, and Silas knew that he could never fully understand the weight of her heritage. He respected her, admired her, but there were things about her life that he could never be a part of. One evening, after a long day of work, Silas and Tala sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, the world around them settling into a quiet stillness. Tala was unusually quiet, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. Silas glanced at her, wondering what was on her mind. "I've been thinking," she said softly, breaking the silence, "about the life I left behind, my people. They are waiting for me." Silas felt a pang of something deep within him, though he couldn't place what it was. He had known from the beginning that Tala wasn't meant to stay. She had come to him for shelter, for refuge, but her journey was not over. She had responsibilities, obligations that she could not escape. "I understand," Silas said quietly, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. "You have a life to go back to." Tala looked at him then, her eyes soft but filled with an intensity that took Silas by surprise. "I didn't expect to find what I have here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to find someone like you." Silas's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. He had spent so many years alone that the idea of sharing his life with someone felt foreign. But Tala wasn't just anyone. She was different. He could feel it in his bones, the way she had changed everything about his world in such a short time. "I never meant to stay," Tala continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But sometimes life has a way of bringing people together in ways we don't understand." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Silas didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her that he felt the same way, that he had never expected her to come into his life, but now that she was there, he couldn't imagine it any other way. But he knew that the road ahead wasn't so simple. There were too many things they couldn't change, too many things that separated them. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, his thoughts a tangled mess. He couldn't stop thinking about Tala, about her soft voice, about the way she had looked at him when she spoke of leaving. He wanted to keep her there, wanted to hold on to the feeling she had brought into his life, but he knew it wasn't that simple. She had a life waiting for her, a life he couldn't be a part of. The next morning, Silas found Tala standing by the fence looking out over the plains. She seemed lost in thought, her expression distant, almost sad. He approached her quietly, unsure of what to say, but before he could speak, she turned to face him. "I have to leave," she said, her voice low but firm. "My people are waiting for me. They need me?" Silas felt a wave of disappointment wash over him, but he nodded. He had known this moment would come, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel so much more real. "I understand," he said, his voice rough. "You have your own life to live." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees, the soft murmurs of the world around them. Then Tala stepped forward, closer to Silas, her gaze never leaving his face. "I'll never forget you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me kindness when I had nowhere else to go. You've given me something I never thought I could have." Silas's heart clenched, and for a moment he thought he might say something to stop her, to tell her to stay, but he couldn't. He knew that if he tried, he would be asking her to give up everything she had known, everything she had worked for, and that wasn't fair. Tala reached out then, her hand brushing against his. The touch was gentle, but it sent a shiver through Silas's body. He wanted to hold her, to never let go, but he knew that wasn't possible. She was a part of a world he couldn't belong to. She was a part of something bigger than him. "I'll always remember you," Silas said quietly, "and I'll always wish you the best." Tala smiled softly, and for a moment Silas saw the warmth in her eyes that had drawn him in from the very beginning. She leaned forward, her lips brushing lightly against his cheek, a soft, fleeting kiss that lingered in his heart long after she had pulled away. With one last glance, Tala turned and walked away. Silas watched her go, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of peace. He knew that he would never forget her, that she would always hold a special place in his heart. And though they had come from different worlds, their paths had crossed for a reason. In the brief time they had shared, they had given each other something neither could have expected. A connection, a bond that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As the sun began to set on the empty ranch, Silas stood alone on the porch, the memory of Tala's touch lingering on his skin. He had lost her, but in some strange way he knew that he had gained something more, something he would carry with him always.